It's the Vancouver Hockey Show, the first edition of 2025. Andrew Wadden alongside the Healthy Scratches, Nick Hauka and Jake Fraser. Boys, Happy New Year. I don't think the same can be said right now for the Vancouver Canucks because kind of feels like we are basically just doing the exact same pod that we did a couple of weeks ago. Canucks continuing to struggle, but also this rift between their two best players and JT Miller and Elias Pettersson seems to be ongoing. We'll get to that in just a moment, boys. But like I said, Happy New Year. Great to have you both here. 2-2-2 since we last lit up the mics, guys. So very average for the Canucks. But I think we saw the worst loss of the season back on, I believe it was the 28th of December against Seattle when they blew a 4-1 lead with 5 minutes to go in the third period. I'll start off with you, Nick. I mean, obviously, that's the worst loss of the year. I don't want to say is it rock bottom. I feel like perhaps there could be further to go. Hopefully they don't get there. But just your takeaways from what you've seen over this sort of holiday break here. And really, how the hell do the Canucks dig themselves out of it? Is it going to take something like just a big, shake up of the roster like we are expecting for these guys to pull their head out of their ass?
Well, yeah, I think it's going to be tough right now. Like, you're missing 3 out of your top 5 players. I think if any team's in that situation, they're bound to struggle. I'm actually surprised they're doing as well as they are, to be honest with you. Like, if you look at our blue line right now, that is not a winning blue line. Like, Guillaume Brisebois on the first pair, that's not a winning recipe. Then, like, in that Seattle game, I was actually really impressed with how they played. I thought for about 55 minutes, they were the better team and they looked awesome. I was like, wow, is this not going to be a problem? They're playing fast, they're playing aggressive, and it looked really good. And then all of a sudden, you had that weird bank goal by Jaden Schwartz. And then before you could blink an eye, it was 4-4. And you're kind of like, what the heck is going on here? And then obviously in overtime, they blew it with that very off pass by Tyler Myers. That was a very chaos giraffe play, who I actually think has been playing quite well for the most part. But yeah, I don't think it's a winning recipe with 3 of your top 5 players out right now. And I think they're not playing that bad, but then I think some of the players that are in the lineup, like JT, who I know we'll get to later, I don't think he's elevating his play. I think he's kind of doing the bare minimum right now, and it's really showing up.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people commenting on that as well. Just Miller seems a little bit disinterested in playing at some points in the game. I think the Nashville game, a lot of people noticed just a little bit of a lack of effort from him there. And then to comment on the decor, like you said, in the both Seattle games even, and even the Nashville game, I thought the decor looked pretty solid. Like a lot better than what I expected. I expected us to be getting blown out of the water by these bottom feeder teams with that decor that they were playing. But yeah, I think it's pretty obvious these guys just aren't used to playing these bigger minutes too. And I think that's part of the reason why you see these breakdowns later in games. I mean, they blew the lead to Seattle and lost that one game, but then they blew another lead to them again just a few days later. So a lot of these players aren't used to playing these 20 plus minutes a night. Noah Juleson, for example, probably used to playing 13, 14 minutes a night as opposed to getting higher up there. But yeah, I think for the most part, being 2-2-2 with Hughes being out, Hronek, Pettersson, Demko being a little bit shaken up too. I think that is a positive, like Nick said. Like, I think they're playing above what they should be expected to play like with the lineup that they have to go out with every night.
Yeah, the problem with that though is the fact that they really haven't given themselves a chance to have that buffer, right? When you look at the overall record, as of recording today, they got the second wild card spot right now in the West. They play Vegas in the first round. If the playoffs started tomorrow, that's not going to be good. And of course, with the guys that they do have out now, also while we record this, they start a road trip tomorrow, and apparently a practice today. Hughes and Pettersson were on the ice, and it is expected that Hughes could be back in the lineup. Not so sure about Pettersson just yet. But one of the things that sort of stands out to me, guys, is, you look at last year, and, last year they got all the bounces, and then we kind of predicted that there was going to be a regression this year just because of the fact that, the PDO was like through the roof. They were the PDO kings last year. And I know we heard enough of that from, outside media as well. Made us roll our eyes then, but we're kind of seeing that it was true. But at the same time, too, like, I didn't see this sort of fall off. Like, I thought for sure they'd be in that mix for the top 3 spots in the Pacific. They're 7 points out of third right now in the Pacific. Like, they're looking at a wild card spot unless they can really catch fire. Now, we are going to talk about Patterson and Miller for sure, because it does feel like, a shakeup is imminent here. Or I shouldn't say imminent, but it's going to happen at some point here. I don't know if it's going to happen tomorrow, next week, maybe even the week after that. There is time. But it does feel like, it's sort of a cancer right now around this team, and they've got to sort of get themselves out of it. But one of the things that's been prominent throughout the whole season is just how bad they are on home ice. Like, they're 7, 8, and 6 now, Jake. They got 3 wins in their last 9 games at home. Like, I don't really know what can explain that, especially when you look at the road record where they're like 11, 4, and 2. I got to get that correct, but I know they've got 11 wins on the road. What is it? Is it just like the pressure of being at home? Is it the fact that, there is all this sort of, chaos surrounding the team, or is it just hard to explain? I mean, cause I can't put my finger on it.
Yeah, I can't either. I mean, at least when I used to play, like, the home games are the ones that you really get up for. Like, I loved playing in front of the home crowd. It was always even more exciting to me. So I don't think there is even a lot of pressure with that either. Like, yeah, your home fans are paying money to come see you play. They want to see a win, obviously, but you like, I don't think that adds pressure on a player. Like, a player isn't sitting in the room before a game thinking, oh no, I've got to play well tonight, or I'm going to get my DMs flooded with people hating on me for losing a home game. So yeah, I think it's just, it's really strange. Like, and off the top of my head, like, the teams they've played on home ice haven't been, it's not like they've played in their 17 or 20 so games of home ice, or home games. They haven't played like 20 juggernauts. They've lost games to some weaker teams that they should be beating. So yeah, I don't really understand it. I mean, I guess maybe this JTPD turmoil could really be a bigger issue with the home ice play, because they are in the rink more often. They're like, you're not really, you're coming for pregame skate in the morning, whereas on the road I feel like you can kind of separate yourselves a little bit more. You sit at opposite ends of the plane. You don't meet up for dinner that night, that kind of thing. So, I mean, maybe that's what this is, but yeah, I can't really explain it.
Yeah, it's so weird. Like, being on home ice is supposed to kind of give you that like normal routine that you follow and kind of that comfort of being at home. So I find it so strange that they like can't get up, and they're notoriously starting slow at home too, which is so odd. Usually you kind of feed off the crowd, and the crowds have been okay this year for the most part, like not bad, right? So you feel like they'd feed off of that, come out with energy, and that just hasn't happened at all. It's so odd.
Losing 3-0 to Nashville was tough. I mean, that's a tough loss there. I know we talked about the blown lead to Seattle, but I mean, 3 buzz to the Nashville Predators. And you mentioned JT Miller, like, he really looked disinterested at the end of that game, and you don't blame him, really. Like, they think this one of those games that they were chasing the entire way, and you're sitting there going, like, really, we're chasing the Nashville Predators right now on home ice. So you can see why there's some frustration mounting around the team. And yes, injuries are a major concern here. Like, your 2 best, if you only really have 2 really good defensemen in Hronek and Hughes. And if you look at the stats over that 6 games, like, Hughes is tied for the team lead in points over that 6 hours. Sorry, he's 1 behind, but he only played 2 games. He's got 5 points in 2 games. The leaders were Miller and Besser with 6 points each over the 6 game span. what we're really starting to see here from this Canucks team is, because the sample size is not small now, we are just about at the midway point of the season. Canucks 38 games played. They're just an average team, Nick. That's what all the analytics tell us. That's what the record tells us. They're barely over 500 in terms of points percentage. They basically have a losing record if you take the OTL and shootout losses and combine them with the losses. So, what's going to happen here? Because here we are on our last pod, and I broke down the fact that they've got the necessary pieces that teams try to get when they're trying to build a contender. Top flight center, a really good number one D man, superstar goaltender, and not only that, they've also got this all-star goaltender that sort of came out of nowhere. And I know that you build around those guys, but it's not really that much of a different team than last year, outside of the fact that they're, not getting the breaks, and there's possibly some turmoil going on with this team. Like, is it going to take, I guess, really the question, is it going to take a major shakeup for this team to be able to get over the hurdle? Or could it be that they could, mend these fences and perhaps be able to do it internally? Because if you look down the middle, if you've got, 9-40 down the middle, like that's stronger than what, like 70% of the teams in the league?
Yeah, like I think a big thing that we're not talking about a lot is I think losing Ian Cole and Nikita Zadorov is actually a lot bigger than we thought it was going to be. Zadorov was far from perfect, and same from Ian Cole, but Cole was able to kind of play on that second pair or third pair, and then when we needed to, he could elevate up in the lineups when there was injuries or players were struggling, right? I don't think we have that guy right now. I do think Vinny Desharnais has been a lot better the last 3 games. Jake was actually mentioning that. He was texting me. He's like, is Desharnais playing better? Or is it just me? I'm like, no, you're right. Like, he is. He's making good tape-to-tape passes. He had that stretch pass for a breakaway. Like, he's looked a lot better. So that's going in the right direction. So that's good. But I think we're really missing those guys on the back end. And I think something has to be done. We need to make a trade in some way, because right now, like, the defensive core isn't good enough. And I actually like our depth forwards. I think they're even better than last year. But the top 6, we have some injuries right now. But when we were healthy, they're not playing good enough, and they're not elevating their play. They're not playing to a high enough level like they were last year. And I think that's why we're struggling. I think something has to happen. And if there is turmoil, like everyone's talking about, which there seems to be, judging by those players' answers, someone's got to go, because those two personalities just seem to clash so much. I don't think there's going to be a resolution, realistically. I think Petey is his own way, JT is his own way, and they're very opposite sides of the spectrum. I don't think that's going to get resolved. I don't think it's going to. So something needs to happen.
Jake, do you take a lot of stock out of what we heard from Brad Richardson? He was on, can't remember the podcast name, but he was on a podcast basically saying, hey, listen, like, I told JT to take it easy on this guy. Now, it's kind of easy to say that and be that guy. And, I don't want to say he's making up stories, but he might be bending things a little bit. But regardless, he's on a list now of people that have said there's been friction between these two players for a while. You can add Bruce Boudreau to that. Travis Green obviously saw it firsthand as well. So, when you do take that into consideration, like, is it just, listen, one's got to go, like, or like Elliot Friedman reported, both guys are kind of in play. Like, we could see, Jake, some major changes happening here within the core of the Canucks over the next little while.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, like, having those two guys down the middle, it's better than probably 30 out of the 32 teams in the league. Like,
sure,
it's at least top 5 center duo in the NHL. So it's so hard to let either of them go. But yeah, I just think something's got to give. And, you look at their contracts right now. We've talked about this in the past too. Like, Pettersson doesn't have the no move. He doesn't have any trade protection this year. So it would be a lot easier to move off of him. I like the idea of staying younger. I understand JT brings so much to the team, and Pettersson gets down on himself and But JT can be like that too. And we saw that in the Nashville game, like we just talked about. Like he has a history of being a little bit pouty at times as well. So in a different way, but I don't know. I like the idea of staying younger, but obviously JT controls his destiny where he goes in a trade. So you do lose a lot of leverage in that as well. But yeah, I mean, I've even seen people talking. Of course, there's a ton of mock trades out there on Twitter, and I've been following a lot of those. One of my favorites, actually, trade both of them and bring in the two kids that are ripping up the World Juniors right now, Gabe Perreault and Ryan Leonard on the U.S. team, and then bring in Vinny Trocheck and another piece from Washington. I don't hate that idea, but obviously this team wants to win now, so you're looking at bringing in more roster players. I think if from what I've seen, JT Miller is the only team that's really in play on Miller's end is the New York Rangers. So yeah, there's not a ton to work with there. Yeah, the teams, they've got Jim Rutherford and Patrick Allvin. They've got a lot of work cut out for them here, and they're going to have to find a solution that doesn't hurt this team for right now and for the future.
I've kind of changed my tune on keeping JT over PD. I feel like, especially in the Nashville game and in the stretch with PD being hurt, this was kind of JT's time to prove like he's the guy that we should keep. And he hasn't, like, he's played okay, but he's been lazy at times. And he hasn't shown that he's the guy, in my opinion. I think, and as Jacob, as you were saying, I think a lot of the issues PD has, JT does have in his own way. It looks different, but you do see the pouty stuff from time to time.
They're both kind of childish, really.
Yeah, they really are. And he's 32, and PD's 26 or turning 26.
Yeah, he's still in his 20s. Yeah,
he's still in his 20s, right? So, yeah, like I've kind of changed my tune on that. I think the other question is this team's window starting to close? Like Brock's going up for expiry soon.
Yeah.
Demko has back spasms, which is a huge relief because everyone thought it was his knee. This season isn't going well. Like, is this team window like closing really quickly? Like, what do you do if you're the regime right now?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you guys, because I floated that trade on our last pod and we clipped it and ended up putting it up on socials. And if you missed it, well, go back and listen, guys. But anyway, if you did miss it, I propose maybe they go to New York and say, listen, we got Miller for sale, or excuse me, Pettersson for sale here. How about Keandre Miller, nice young defenseman, someone that if you are thinking future for the Canucks, he's going to be a part of it. And Vinny Trocheck, if you are thinking window, he can, work in that window that you have right now. Some people agreed with it. Most people shit on it, to be honest with you. One guy even said, I'm really glad you're not our GM, which I thought was really hilarious. And another guy just said, you have awful takes. Hey, listen, I could take it, right? But at the same time, too, you have to figure out exactly what this is right now. Are you building for the future, or is the window right now? Because you do have Demko going into his UFA year next year. You could re-up him in the summer if you want to. And obviously there's talk about, whether they're going to try to bring Kevin Lankin into a contract to be able to, move forward with him as well. But, if the window is right now and you're locked up to Miller, why not just go for it now? Because there are some pieces in place that are still in development. Tom Wielander is still at Boston College. You still have Lekarmaki that is down in Abbotsford, right? So, there could be a pivot 3 to 4 years from now, but like it's a bit of a risky business because of the fact that you do have Demko on, basically a short contract right now. You also have Hughes on a bit of a short contract right now. Like, what's he got? 2 more after this? And that's a guy you do not want to mess with. Right? Like, that's the guy that you got to make sure that if you are going to build around the future, that is your centerpiece right there. So I think they kind of have to figure out exactly which way they're going. You talk about Besser, and he's also part of that conversation. Could we see Brock Besser on the move here, guys? Like, could he be a part of a package? Like, could this be just like a monster Jim Rutherford, swing for the fences type deal? And I don't know if you guys remember, but like, the Leafs back in the day did one of these with the Calgary Flames in the 90s that basically, set them up for a bit of a run of contention. And of course, they weren't able to get over the hump then. But it was one of those like blockbusters where you're sending out big core pieces in. I think Doug Gilmour came back on the return. This ain't a Leaf pod. You guys don't want to know, but it's still that's the point. Like it was a core shakeup that basically, worked out for Toronto, and they weren't able to ultimately get it done. But the Canucks are kind of at that spot right now where it's like, are we thinking future or are we thinking window right now? And that gives them a lot of options, but also a lot of teams are looking around going, well, okay, sure. These guys are, that we've got the leverage here, right? I've seen some people say that Pettersson's contract's not movable. Jake, I disagree with that. I think some teams are sitting there going, oh yeah, like if we get our hands on this guy, get him out of that toxic environment that he's in, like 100-point guy every year for us, right?
Yeah, 100%. That contract's definitely not unmovable. Like you're trading Elias Pettersson, you're gonna get full value for him. A lot of teams are gonna be willing to pay up for him. You talk about Hughes building the team around him. 100%. I'm sure Jim Rutherford and Patrick Allvin are talking to Quinn Hughes. What does he want to do? What has he seen in the locker room? Who, like maybe Hughes is saying Miller doesn't just have issues with JT or with PD, but maybe there's a few other guys that are having problems with Miller. So yeah, I think Quinn Hughes is definitely a part of their conversations and considerations. They're definitely checking in on him, seeing what he thinks would be best for the team. Rick Tocchet as well, of course. Like head coach, you want to make sure that he has guys that he wants to coach. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Brock Besser got moved, not necessarily as part of the same deal, but separate deals maybe, where you move JT Miller, bring in a replacement center and some other pieces, and then you move Brock Besser and maybe get that top 4 defenseman that the team's been needing. But yeah, I think that this year or this time next year, like the team, even by the trade deadline, like the team's going to look a lot different than it does right now.
Hey guys, I got a proposition for you. I don't know if you saw Jeremy Roenick shitting on Connor Bedard for not respecting the history of the Chicago Blackhawks. Hear me out. What if we give them good American boys, JT Miller and Brock Besser, who definitely respect the culture of that team, and you give us that disrespectful Canadian back? What a freaking 19, 20-year-old. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Let's give them proven vets, and you can give us back that disrespectful Canadian boy. We'll work it out with him. How about that?
Listen, I don't think it's Miller and Besser. That if that was the case, I might be able to hear you on Elias Pettersson though. But then at that point, how are you going to make up the $11 million? Although I haven't looked at the cap situation for Chicago, they might even have the space.
That would be like the most ridiculous trade.
I just don't see it happening though. But again, this roster shakeup could be really huge for the Canucks, and maybe that's the way that the Rutherford regime is looking at this year. Maybe they're looking at this year like, hey, this isn't our year. We're having all this turmoil. Like our core's in flux right now. We got to keep 43 happy because like I stated before, like this is the best player in franchise history. I'll hear the argument about the Sedins, but the trajectory that this guy is on. Like he is going to be, top 5 defenseman in NHL history, not just, top 5 player for the Canucks all time. So I want to keep that guy as happy as possible, but maybe they're looking at this season going, maybe we limp into the playoffs, maybe we do the core shakeup, but we really sort of focus on next year. And, Lekaramaki with a year of development, maybe he can come in and replace, a spot that they need to fill. Perhaps it's Besser's spot. Who knows right now, but a very interesting times surrounding the Canucks right now. Before we get out of here though, guys, like I am really interested though in, just sort of the nuggets that Patrick Allvin, Nick, has been sort of putting out there, because Ian McIntyre had a one-on-one with Patrick Allvin. And if you're listening to this pod, I'm sure you've been caught up on all the quotes that are came out from Allvin, but just the one when he was asked about Pettersson, and I know it was in print, so we don't really get to see the body language or, really how he said it, but there was an indication that, Patrick Alvin, when asked about trading Elias Pettersson, was like, well, do you know Jim Rutherford's history? So, there is something there, right? Where, maybe, because like I said, when we're on our TikTok and our Instagram, like we've got people just like flat out, just like, no, they're not, there's no way they're trading Pettersson. But I think the reality, Nick, is that it could come to fruition. But $11.6 million, very few people to work with in terms of cap space. But also, too, as I suggested on the last pod, maybe you get two pieces back.
Yeah, like that's very telling. Again, in print, it's kind of, you can kind of pick apart quotes and stuff like that. But yeah, like you got to get a haul, right? Like this can't be another Cam Neely situation from back in the day where you just get absolutely ripped and you're watching this guy for the next 10 years going, oh my God, how did we let this guy go? So it's got to be equal value at the very least. Obviously, like you're not trading from a position of strength because this is all around the league now. Like insider, like Elliot Friedman is talking about this now constantly. Like this is all over the league. So it needs to be a good deal. I'm sure the other Veen regime would not get ripped off because they're not really that management group that makes dumb deals. So I'm not really concerned about that. But I think if it's Petey, you have to have someone for the future who's younger and then someone for the window now. If we get two pieces, sure. But like it's got to be really good value or it's just not worth it.
Jake, would you do it? Would you pull the trigger? Like, because I mean, look at how many 40 jerseys there are in the stands. I know Miller's, gets his name chanted and whatnot, but like, Petey was sort of like, him and Hughes were going to be the guys to sort of elevate this team, to back to where they used to be back in the year, 2010s and whatnot.
Yeah, like I said earlier, he is the easier guy to move without the trade protection. I said in the last pod, I want the team to keep Petey. I think that's the best move for the future of the team. And I haven't been a big believer in them being a serious cup contender this year. I think they've still got a year or two when they can bring up like the Tom Wielander, Jonathan Lecker-Mackey, DPD even. Like I think he should be a piece on this roster in a year or two. But yeah, I mean, for the right deal, for sure, pull the trigger. Why not? Like if you can get, say, I mean, I'll float something out there. Rasmus Anderson and maybe Nazem Kadri. Like Kadri's not Petey by any means, but that's a solid number 2 center. And then you get Rasmus Anderson, the D-man for right now. He's got 2 years left on his deal. It's pretty cheap. And I think the salaries would match up that way as well. Like that could be a possibility. Obviously would love to get Connor Bedard here for PD, but not sure.
So disrespectful. Such a disrespectful young man.
Why don't we just go to San Jose and get Celebrini, collect all the North Van kids as well? You know what, that trade...
PD for Bedard and then Miller for Celebrini, and there you go. The team's set.
Yeah, I don't know if that one's going to happen there, Jake.
Blackmail those
happen. But the funny thing is though, when you put out the Kadri and Henderson, that's pretty similar to what I was talking about with the Rangers, with Miller and Trocheck. So, and listen, Nazem Kadri and JT Miller, your two centers down the middle, or if it's a Trocheck and JT Miller, your two centers down the middle, like that's pretty quality centers there. But at the same time too, that's a short window at that point, right? Because you're looking at guys that are already in their 30s at that point. All right, let's just focus in on the week ahead here, guys, because they're going to hit the road, and it's going to be a tough road trip here. They started on Monday in Montreal, then Wednesday in Washington, Carolina on Friday with a back-to-back facing off against the Leafs on Saturday. They'll wrap up the road trip the following week in Winnipeg on Tuesday. So, guys, all quality opponents. And, yeah, I'm throwing the Montreal Canadiens in there too, Nick, because they're playing really well right now. Out of those games, and we'll speak to you guys before the Winnipeg game, so maybe let's take that one off. So in the 4 games this week, Nick, and you can follow up afterwards, Jake, tell me how you think. out of those 8 points, Montreal, Washington, Carolina, Toronto, keeping in mind back to back, how many points do you think they're going to come out with?
I think 4 or 5 is a good number. I think they realistically could do that. Montreal's been really good, especially since getting Lane back in the lineup. Like, he's looked really good. I know he was out on the weekend because he's sick, but I think he'll be back for that game. I think 4 or 5 should be okay. I think that would be probably best case scenario because, again, like, the roster isn't looking great right now and you're going against a bunch of hot teams. But again, we also play better on the road, so you never know. They could play up to the competition, right? So I think 4 or 5 is kind of a good spot.
Yeah, I was going to put them just below that at about 3 or 4. It depends on if Hughes is playing Monday. I think you can assume that the Canucks should be able to beat Montreal with Quinn Hughes in the lineup, and it does depend on when Petey's back as well. I mean, the Capitals just seem like, they're one of the top teams in the league. That's so unexpected. I would have had that penciled in as a W if it was the start of the season now, but with how they're playing, I don't know if they can take that, win that game. But then
coming out of nowhere, hey?
Yeah. They drafted his brother, and now he's pumped to play there, I guess.
He's playing with Ovi, too. That probably
Well, I was right about the 11 wins. 11-4-2 on the road for the Canucks. So let's see if they can, add to that record in what is going to be a daunting road trip, a gauntlet that they're going to have to run against some quality opponents. We'll be back to recap it all, probably do next week's show, maybe a little bit later in the week, maybe another week from today on the Sunday when they have a bit of a break. And, NFL playoffs are going to be going on as well. We're all big football guys here too, so we'll have our eyes on that. But man, this could be one of those weeks that really could, tell us a lot about the Vancouver Canucks. I don't know if you make this big, trade while they're on the road. I don't know if it even matters at this point. If you do have a suitor and you have a deal in place that you like, maybe you pull the trigger. We'll have to see. But every hour that goes by here in Canuckland, guys, seems to be really interesting, especially with what's happening with the top players. All right, we'll be back again next week. Thanks for listening, everybody. I'm Andrew Wadden for the Healthy Scratches. It's been another edition of the Vancouver Hockey Show right here on YouTube.